Imagine a country where the people are so fed up with their government, but they take to the streets, demanding change and refusing to back down even in the face of violence and intimidation. This is the reality in Indonesia, where anti-government protests have been raging for days, leaving a trail of destruction and death in their wake. But here's where it gets controversial. The protests are not just about economic issues, but also about the perceived corruption and elitism of the government. And this is the part most people miss. The fact that the protesters are not just fighting for their rights, but also for the future of their country. The protests began as a response to a range of cost of living issues, including the high cost of housing and the low minimum wage. But they quickly escalated into a full-blown crisis after the killing of a motorcycle taxi driver by a police vehicle during a demonstration in the capital, Jakarta. The driver, Afan Kurniawan, was just 21 years old and was reportedly completing a food delivery service order when he was hit by the armored police vehicle. The incident sparked widespread outrage and calls for justice, with many accusing the police of using excessive force. As the protests continued, the government faced mounting criticism for its handling of the situation. President Prabowo Subianto, a former military general, called for calm and asked the people to trust the government and his leadership. But his words fell on deaf ears, and the protests only grew more intense. The protesters are demanding a range of reforms, including a salary cut for parliamentarians, whom they accuse of being corrupt elites. They are also calling for an increase in the minimum wage and a reduction in taxes and inflation, which they say are making life impossible for many Indonesians. But what's really driving the protests is a sense of frustration and disillusionment with the government. Many Indonesians feel that the government is out of touch with their needs and concerns, and that it is more interested in serving the interests of the wealthy and powerful than in helping the poor and vulnerable. This feeling of disenfranchisement is not unique to Indonesia, of course. Many countries around the world are experiencing similar protests and movements, driven by a sense of anger and frustration with the political and economic systems. But the situation in Indonesia is particularly volatile, given the country's history of political instability and its strategic importance in the region. So what's next for Indonesia? The government has promised to investigate the killing of the motorcycle taxi driver and to take steps to address the protesters' grievances. But it remains to be seen whether these promises will be enough to calm the situation and restore order. One thing is certain, however. The protests in Indonesia are a wake-up call for the government and for the world. They are a reminder that the people will no longer be silenced or ignored, and that they will fight for their rights and their future no matter the cost. And this is the part that should spark a lot of debate. Should the government prioritize the needs of the people? Or should it prioritize the needs of the economy and the wealthy elite? Should the protesters be praised for their bravery and determination, or should they be condemned for their violence and disruption? These are the questions that need to be answered, and they are the questions that will shape the future of Indonesia and of the world. So, we ask you, what do you think about the protests in Indonesia? Do you think the government is doing enough to address the protesters' grievances, or do you think it needs to do more? Do you think the protesters are justified in their demands, or do you think they are being too radical and too violent? Let us know in the comments.